blackness is offered as progressive labor. It's only met through the moniker of death, which is how regulatory idioms of things like the subject, the citizen, and the human all become sustainability. Opposition of desire against the phobic object, i.e. freedom, is seen as our ultimate goal because the alternative is slavery. See the radical freedom, multiple instances, freedom from the gulags, freedom from being black in the United States. The ultimate expression of freedom is seen in schools where people seek to distance themselves from blackness in terms of things like populations, i.e. even in the quality of neighborhoods. Our argument is that the quality of life is measured against the backdrop of radical subjugation of black. The impact is this stifles any criticism of their relations to prove the stability the act hoped for is operationalized in a paradigm that keeps population safe for blackness too. It's a shifting all yeah, fuck that. Actually, fuck all that shit. Yeah. Link to it. Wilson 14 argument, only those individuals who experience the constant need to refuse violence can be understood as black. Those who are spared objective vertigo in the world of the affirmative are then allowed to use debate as an indeterminate factor of their survival. Then the plantation now becomes narrativization because it becomes a tool of subjugation. If we win the solves the mechanism, the affirmative wrestling the need for opposition to their sociality is always inevitably realizing a world that is one of legible coherence, which is how we want to see is a telos of repetition because it never deals with an inextricable relationship with its blackness, but also mystifies the way in which debate is just an involving precarious, advent bit, unascending vitality and sentence through this late, which means even if they win a link turn to this, the one cannot account for all the violence done in this realm, nor do they create strategies for anyone else, which that the plantation becomes another model of incapacitation, which is why the most radical affirmation of blackness is a total withdrawal from the world in which and the way in which subjectivity spreaders extend the woods evidence they have not answered in the fucking 2 the way to attempt to wage a war on the position of half the indigenous community through refusal only secures the jurisprudential dream work of civil society by granting native body spatial and temporal recognition. This politics is parasitic on black social death as political itself is only as political community itself is only sort of imaginable through a politics symbolic mediation where the slave remains a photo object and proves their politics misidentifies the shared experience in the social as per the wood evidence that says black Africans and indigenous Americans do not perform the same usefulness of the structure of humanity, which proves that the affirmative is an aspirational humanity that seeks to become familiarized with the pinch zoomed ontological and ethical relational status of history without understanding that blackness, at least in the context of land, is not a concept that can be properly encountered by blackness, which internally turns most of their offense they're going for because it means that the world of the African can recognize their politics is important, but still the measure of ontology persists. It means any risk of a link, they relegate blackness to the unthought there. They've also not answered the sex and evidence. There's no totalizing, overlapping intersectional means of addressing indigeneity and structural blackness together. The movements towards the telos of sovereignty trade off with the condition and possibility offered by black radicals. That there's a paradoxical nature of freedom. Just that natives are currently engaged in multiplicity of resistance strategies, things like abolition, reconstruction, decolonization, research, and all of this shit becomes operative within a liminal status of humanity as regulation becomes an imposition by which the settler seeks to displace authentic sovereignty, place history, when our argument is blackness is not an imposition, but rather that upon which regulation itself becomes imposed, which is how their imposed structural displacement to think of relative placelessness between the slave and non-blacks in order to establish a somatic convolution against state-based hostility is their pluralistic notion to situate all objects as settlers. This at best assumes everyone wants to return to an engaged in land-based existence, which means their impetus really don't. It's anti-political telos within indigenous autonomy becomes their emancipatory ticket to freedom because it forces native sovereignty as a precondition of the relation to land. It places its historiography back into an archive of cohabitation, which has two implications. One, it means the shared history struggle between natives and blacks becomes a means of denial in the face of native anti-black racism. For example, the only means of solidarity operates via cultural similarities, things like land and foreign practices, kinship structures, I don't know more, no doubt, but all humanity and black become more politically invested with decolonization, which is how the denied knowledge of language, family ties, and land-based relations all become a process of directionation insofar as the lost indigeneity, land, and language cannot all be pursued, retrieved, recovered, located in the archive, used to centralize the political mobilization. I'll extend the impact to the sex and evidence ever, which answers the day evidence because it says that juxtaposing blacks is embodying with natives and inhabiting without diacritically thinking about the way in which without diacritically thinking the inverse of black inhabitation and native embodiment serves to disembody and deracialize native populations, which is to say this is how they gain or maintain their distance towards racial blackness in order to pursue the critical discussion of talking about fucking refusal. What our argument is, what can be done to a captive body, anything whatsoever, that the lack of sovereignty is a fait accompli, a byproduct rather than a precondition of enslavement. The alternative understands the loss of indigenity for the slave operates in two ways. One, it understands that it exists only at the level of abstraction it has and always be lost to history and unretrievable document the archive, a precondition for the hubris of loss and recovery redress. They said they solved the context of research practice through medulla of resilience. This argument in their first piece of evidence only talks about coloniality in terms of how power functions, arguments that social death condition world of how we should filter the context of captivity, coercion, impact, debate, the distinction between body and flesh, the central difference between capital and liberation. The Negroes becoming biological is and should be understood not only as an act of dismemberment but also as a form of non-subjectivity which circumvents most of their dispossession arguments about the world of reproduction being violent because that locates that violence not only at the body but seeks to conflate this with anti-blackness. Our argument is that only the slave possesses a relationship to violence cannot be analogized through the body and is both structural and performative, i.e. social death is a condition of existence. It sort of magnetized bullets but it's also a phobic genetic outgrowth says rape says black, who says prisons says black, i.e. African origin females that were qualified as women because their cardiographic relation reality gender did not exist, therefore not interpolated to partake in the social construction of how gender is now constituted from the modern separation of slaves from, i.e. white women, but more so how this is how modernity collectively shaped how agency and sexuality are reproduced and produced and stifled through means of non-consent. It also means their argument about the indigenous body experiencing death via femicide is bad and sets the impetus for refraining from reconstituting blackness or conceiving or theorizing the access of gender as self-possessing. Instead, you should prefer our analysis that situates the coterminous ungendering with black men and women in order to truly realize the antithetical essence of blackness, property, gender, violence, sexuality. All those circulate through a defacing libidinal comment that reveals the external phasia that determines desire and coercion and the properties of enslavement that determine choice and identity for black males or co-constitutive of any risk when internally to the AFMEs, which means there is not a reason to prefer their inland. Now, you should frame the arguments I'm about to make through. Blackness cannot be rated within the frame of domesticity. This is a pick out of the frame of patriarchal reproductive violence tied to the body. Our reading of the black woman in terms disagrees with the notion that violence against the female is denied through political language or as opposed to structural non-communicability. Black women and men become the choice of space. They become a measure of labor, which not only determines how they are interpreted and coherent into symbols of labor, more so speaks how gender becomes merely a function of making body fungible. They do not exist as inhabitants of property or self-actualization, but rather animated under the rubric of slavery by the attempt to manipulate their ontological connotation of production, which is how the lack of domesticity is King's argument about how gender invocation is sort of propertized outside the category of the human, because black people do not possess fucking gender, or instead possessed by it, which means the one sees understanding of how the King evidence works is concerned with only contingent hierarchies of racial sexualization. This is the femicide argument was making in the cross-examination, which proves how they can sort of separate forced reproductivity from the sexual trauma of blackness and force black masculinity, which says we should focus exclusively on the relational capacity of gender. And this question of patriarchy in the instance is just a question of our approximation of the human as gender specificity that contours both the means by which treated as violence is carried out and the avenues of resistance to that violence, as well as framing those in the first place, which is how they sustain resentment by situating the world of captivity and ontology on us by presuming it is solely the material act of penetration that wove the investment in theories and terrorized nature of captivity, which is Jesse's argument about sort of red babies at the end of cross-examination, which is why you should hold them to that impetus. Their argument about sort of creating their argument about sort of creating value in research. You can see that the aphasia sort of outweighs the moment that we sort of understand how anti-blackness created the slave and African are now understood as black, is how we should sort of filter how you should understand native bodies. But it's also not a question of how we research, but whether the apparatus of research is bad in of itself, which is why Wilson 14 sets an emphasis for how we should sort of refuse this in the first place. They say refusing the central understanding of sovereignty via the body. This is the body link that I don't think I'll have to do a work in the 2R, which proves all of our bare life arguments that indicates that we should separate the understanding from body from the flesh, which means their understanding that body exceeds the flesh only assumes that the body in of itself is a capacious entity in of itself. Our argument is that this does not make sense in the context of anti-blackness. They say indigeneity is static in the status quo. Our argument is that there is that studies of whiteness sort of crowd out blackness in the status quo. They say we should review the vulnerability of sovereignty. This is how they distance themselves from the liminal status between object and subject, which is our argument about their argument. The last thing they said debate conditions in terms of climate, which is how narratives are sort of overdetermined. This proves that their statusization argument is not our understanding of the liminal status between the native, i.e. how they operate between whiteness and blackness, but is more situated with policy in terms of climate, which means don't let them tie that shit later.
Ready? Sure. I guess my first question is in the context of the piece of wood evidence. What is sovereignty and genocide? How are they different via Woods and your own articulation?
And my articulation?
Your articulation,
well,
Woods
cards.
Right. Our articulation is that even if you think that sovereignty should sort of be, distance itself from this liminal status that is sort of posited in the status quo, but that libidinally it still is attached to how it operates with anti-blackness, which means even if you're right about how sovereignty in terms of the political operates, our argument is on an ontological level. You cannot separate yourself from that relationship. And your attempt to do so
why
is how you...
sovereignty and genocide different? Why are they different than that?
I will make one argument that I did not make. I'll make it in cross-sex. Your Wilderson evidence says you should give Turtle Island back to the savage and then give life back to the slave. That turns all of your Leroy evidence that says we should understand anti-blackness in settler as co-constitutive, as opposed to understanding that land in of itself was something that is inherently distanced itself from natives, and life itself and subjectivity is something that is adhered to the slave. Our argument is that will.
So, through historical analysis, can you explain how does anti-blackness explain like the events like the Buffalo Soldiers?
Our argument is that there is no theory that can explain phenomenon. It is capital T truth, but rather ontology and aphasia, the moment at which we understand African and slave as black, is a erasure of being. Something that our argument is that natives, either yes, they do go through it to a degree, but then meet humanity at the level of the slave.
That doesn't really answer my question.
Yes,
like,
it does, because it's not a question of can we explain violence X, Y, Z. We're impact.
Okay, cool. You make this argument about like modes of refusal being anti-black. I guess specifically, how is Idle No More, Tree Suspense? How are these modes?
Right, we'll
of
pick out
anti-black?
of the moments in which Idle No More seeks recognition, but rather, the revolutionary parts of Idle No More, the alternative degree.
Is that what the pick is?
No, the pick is out of here a domestic understanding of how violence happens at the flesh. Or a reproduction argument about how red babies is an instant form of violence. Our argument is that tied to the body sort of distances itself from not only how reproduction sort of exists in terms of things like writing, language, all these there's different reproduction. You just tied to the body. We're making a very.
Where did the F say that those forms don't also exist? Like, why do you think there's like a trait?
Or it's just like, I'm good, and you just appeared. According to their cards.
No, sure. One second.
God damn it.
Yep. Good to go.
Yeah.
They don't get a permutation of Wilderson evidence. It further explains the technology of Get Back Turtle Island as an instance in which native sovereignty can be revitalized in relation to the impossible demand of freeing the slave. Insofar as modernity is structured through its deference to account black flesh as simply existing, this is precisely the Sexton's argument. This means we have a relationality DA via the Barishi evidence that never gets answered, that assumes there's a capacity for communication to ever be valued between the black body and the world. This assumption constitutes a kind of aphasia to the peculiarity of anti-black violence. It assumes that slavery is reducible to literal enslavement. This is all of the rhetorical moves that their Leroy evidence is making, which is a reason why the evidence is inherently problematic, because that reduction to historization, even fleeing from a historization, doesn't take into account the varying capacity for coloniality to structure violence at the level of the flesh. VR Sexton evidence, a perfect example is the way in which South Africa did not require the expulsion of black flesh from space itself, but through the apartheid state on top of them, which speaks to the nature of the way in which the very understanding of colonization, settler colonialism needs to be inverted in this relation to anti-blackness, insofar as the technologies and infrastructure, i.e. the clearing of space or value itself, is only predicated at the level of black peculiarity as an influx to a very position subjectivity. This is a multiculturalism DA to the permutation because it always requires we eliminate the nuance of precarity at the door for the sake of vitalism in terms of how we produce particular pathologies, deconstructions to pathologies. Now we are making a framing argument about the way in which your ballot operates via our Woodison 14 evidence, which goes, co-conceded debate itself becomes a bastion of relationality where discourse only allows the master to seller to recreate themselves through appeal to engagement in the first place. We can problematize our own irredeemability, irredeemability. That becomes a conundrum in a relation of value within the spectrum of debate, insofar as you automatically produce a kind of value placement in relation to the affirmative. You vote for them if you think their pedagogy is good, if you think their pedagogy is valuable. That's precisely the enactment of sellerism that allows for space to be cleared in relation to production of subjectivity or possibilities for such to be created, which is the double turn that the Wilderson evidence articulates, but it further propagates a kind of voyeurism because they concede that debate operates as a space incorporation of black flesh at the sake sustaining white life and civility. And civility, voyeurism operates at the level of sacrifice, i.e. their call to affirm the affirmative moves towards the end of the world. Only moves towards the end of the world insofar as it assumes that commensurability or communication has the ability to resolve the ways in which education is produced. But it begs the question, how does the anti-education of the affirmative create the conditions to resolve the level of violence matriculated at the body of Native women, or more precisely at the non-body of black natives who operate within a space of production, but also dispossession of the ability to even instantiate the violence that they articulate. They say that people are watching the live stream, that affirmative allows us for a moment to subvert knowledge production. But how does research practice or anthropological study at the level of violence explain the ways in which the social still produces modes of violence, i.e. the magnetization of the bullet from the police and its multiplicity of meaning doesn't require a think tank piece to be produced, but it's instantiated off of a kind of social relationship as the world, how the world is created, i.e. the very production of value in the first place, or subjectivity. This is precisely why violence can be matriculated at the level of the flesh, even when we are producing a counter research to how images are place. This is exactly how the university is able to encapsulate or recode itself around a grammar of recap